In the 41st millennium, there is only war. The Imperium of Man spans 1,000,000 worlds, held together by faith, fear, and the divine will of a rotting corpse god enthroned upon holy Terra. Demons claw at the barriers of reality. Xenos empires rise and fall like tides. And into this maelstrom of endless conflict, something impossible occurred. The Great Tomb of Nazarick, jewel of the Sorcerer Kingdom, seat of the Supreme Being Ainz Ooal Gown, simply ceased to exist in one universe and manifested in another. The transition was not gentle. Ainz Ooal Gown, once the salaryman Suzuki Satoru, now the undead Overlord of Nazarick, felt reality tear itself apart around him. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, even when transported from Yggdrasil to the New World. This was violent, catastrophic, as if the universe itself was rejecting Nazarick's very existence. His undead form's emotion suppression activated repeatedly, cycling through panic, terror, and confusion so rapidly that even the magical dampening couldn't keep pace. Then, with an impact that registered on seismic sensors 300 kilometers away, Nazarick crashed into reality. The tomb materialized 2 kilometers beneath the surface of Vornak 4th, a death world classified as barely suitable for mining operations. The displacement was absolute. Bedrock simply ceased to exist where Nazarick occupied space, the laws of physics bending around the impossibility of a structure that existed before it arrived. Shockwaves radiated outward, collapsing 3 separate mining tunnels and triggering massive rock slides that would be visible from orbit. In the throne room of the 10th floor, Ainz gripped the armrests of his throne with skeletal fingers, his jaw hanging open in a very undignified manner that thankfully none of his subordinates could see through the darkness and strategic positioning. What just happened?" he muttered, then immediately caught himself. No, he was Ainz Ooal Gown, Supreme Being, Master of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. He could not show weakness, could not show confusion. His NPCs, his children, his responsibility, looked to him for guidance and certainty. He straightened, forcing his posture into something appropriately regal. "Albedo, status report." The overseer of the Floor Guardians materialized from her position beside the throne, her golden eyes gleaming with fanatical devotion and barely concealed concern. "My lord, all floors report minimal structural damage. However, we appear to have been displaced from our previous location. The external environment is anomalous. Demerge is already conducting analysis." Before Ainz could respond, Demerge's voice echoed through the magical communication network that connected all of Nazarick. "Ainz-sama, I must report most troubling findings. We are no longer in the New World. We are not, in fact, on any world I can recognize. The stars are wrong. The local magical currents are corrupt, twisted, and supremely dangerous." Ainz felt his emotion suppression activate again. Wrong stars, different universe. This was bad. This was very bad. But he couldn't let them know he was panicking. "I see," he said, his voice carrying perfect calm through undead vocal cords that couldn't waver. "Summon all Floor Guardians to the throne room immediately. We will assess our situation and formulate appropriate responses. Demerge, continue your analysis. I want to know everything about where we are." "As you command, Ainz-sama. Your wisdom is absolute." 20 minutes later, the Floor Guardians assembled before him. Albedo, Demerge, Shaltir Bloodfallen, Cositus, Era Bellofiora, Mare Bellofiore, and Sebastian. each one a level 100 creation, powerful enough to conquer nations in the new world, each one looking at him with unwavering faith that he had all the answers. He absolutely did not have all the answers.
"My children," Ainz began, channeling every corporate meeting he'd ever endured in his previous life. "We face an unprecedented situation. We have been transported to an unknown location through means I am still analyzing." That was technically true. He was analyzing by having no idea whatsoever. However, this presents opportunities as well as challenges. Demiurge, present your findings. The Archdevil stepped forward, adjusting his circular glasses with a clawed hand. Ainz Sama's wisdom in requesting immediate reconnaissance was, as always, impeccable. "I have dispatched low-level undead to scout our immediate surroundings, and captured several local specimens for interrogation. What I have learned is disturbing." Demiurge's tail swished with agitation, a rare display of emotion from the normally composed floor guardian. "We appear to have arrived in what the locals call the 41st millennium. Humanity, or at least a version of humanity, has conquered vast swaths of the galaxy. However, they are beset on all sides by hostile alien species, internal corruption, and entities they call daemons that emerge from something called the warp." Ainz felt his metaphorical stomach drop. Galaxy-spanning civilization? Daemons? This was far, far worse than he'd imagined. "Continue," he commanded, keeping his voice steady. "These soldiers," Sebastian interjected, his normally calm demeanor showing concern, "are not warriors in any meaningful sense. They are conscripts, barely trained, sent to die in conflicts they can hope to understand." "The injustice is irrelevant," Albedo cut in sharply. "These creatures are potential threats to Ainz Sama. They should be eliminated immediately and utterly."
"I agree with Albedo Sama," Cositus rumbled, his mandibles clicking. "These primitives cannot be allowed to report our presence." Ainz raised a hand, silencing them. In truth, he was. They needed to understand this universe's rules before committing to any course of action. "We will not act hastily," Ainz declared. "Demiurge, continue your interrogations. Learn everything you can about this Imperium, about the threats they face, about the technology and power structures of this universe. Shaltir, Cositus, prepare our defenses. If we have been detected, we must assume retaliation is coming. Aura, Mere, I want the outer floors converted into defensive positions immediately. Sebus, ensure all of Nazarick's inhabitants are accounted for and secure." "As you command, Ainz Sama," they chorused in perfect unison. As the floor guardians dispersed to their tasks, Ainz slumped slightly in his throne once they were out of sight. This was bad. This was so incredibly bad. The new world had been manageable. Medieval-level civilizations with some magic users. He could handle that with Nazarick's resources. But a galaxy-spanning empire, daemons, beings that made his world items look like toys. He needed to be smart about this, needed to play his cards carefully. One wrong move and Nazarick, his friend's legacy, his responsibility, could be annihilated by forces he couldn't comprehend. The emotion suppression activated again, and Ainz forced himself to focus. Information first, then strategy, then, maybe, survival. 300 kilometers away, in the primary mining command center of Facility Gamma 7, Overseer Margrave stared at his auger displays with mounting dread. The seismic readings from 3 hours ago had initially been dismissed as tectonic activity. Vornok 4 was tectonically unstable, after all. But then the Vox communications from Survey Team Delta cut off mid-transmission. Then Teams Gamma and Epsilon went silent while investigating. Margrave was a practical man. 30 years in the Imperial Guard before taking this assignment had taught him to recognize when something was very, very wrong. And this situation screamed wrongness with every fiber of his being. Vox Operator, send priority transmission to Sector Command, he ordered, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on the displays. Report unknown hostile presence, possible Xenos incursion. Request immediate military support. Authorization Margrave 77 Tertius. The Vox Operator, a young woman barely out of training, nodded nervously. At once, Overseer. Transmission away. Estimated response time. She never finished the sentence. The doors to the command center exploded inward, and something walked through the smoke and debris. It was tall, impossibly tall, dressed in a butler's uniform that looked absurdly out of place in the grim industrial facility. Its face was handsome in a way that seemed almost artificial, with a perfectly groomed mustache and eyes that held something ancient and dangerous.
Sebas looked around the command center with an expression of mild disappointment. "I am afraid," he said in perfect High Gothic that somehow he had learned from the interrogated prisoners' minds, "that transmission cannot be allowed to reach its destination. My master requires more time to understand this universe before revealing our presence broadly." Margrave went for his last pistol, but he was an old man, augmetics or not. Sebas crossed the distance between them faster than the eye could track, and Margrave found his weapon crushed to powder in the stranger's grip. "I am instructed to minimize casualties where possible," Sebas continued, his tone apologetic. "You will all be detained and treated humanely. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. I suggest surrender." Last-fire erupted from every armed guard in the command center. Sebas stood in the center of the barrage, his butler's uniform not even singed, as last bolts struck him and accomplished precisely nothing. He sighed, then moved. It was over in seconds. Every guard unconscious, disarmed, no fatalities. Sebas was many things, but unnecessarily cruel was not among them, much to Demiurge and Albedo's frequent frustration. "Forgive the intrusion," Sebas said to the terrified command staff. "You will be our guests for the foreseeable future. I promise you will not be harmed if you cooperate." Back in Nazarick, Ainz watched through magical surveillance as Sebas secured the facility. Good. That bought them time. But time for what? He still didn't understand this universe, didn't understand the threats, didn't understand the rules. A soft chime indicated Demiurge had completed his initial interrogation analysis. Ainz steeled himself and accessed the mental report Demiurge transmitted. What he learned made his non-existent blood run cold. This universe operated on fundamentally different principles than the New World. Magic existed, but it was tied to something called the warp, a parallel dimension of pure psychic energy and emotion. And in that dimension lived things called daemons, entities of pure malevolence that actively sought to corrupt, possess, and destroy. Worse, the warp responded to emotion, to belief, to faith. Reality itself could be rewritten by sufficient conviction. The Imperium of Man controlled roughly 1,000,000 worlds and numbered its military forces in the quadrillions. A single one of their worlds likely held more humans than the entire New World. They possessed weapons that could destroy planets, ships that traveled faster than light, and soldiers, these space marines Demiurge had discovered references to, who were genetically engineered super warriors far exceeding normal human capabilities. And the Imperium was losing, slowly, inexorably, ground down by endless war against alien species and chaos corruption. Ainz wanted to log out. He wanted to just close Yggdrasil and wake up in his apartment and go to his terrible job and live his mundane life. But that option didn't exist anymore. It hadn't existed since he'd first arrived in the New World, and it certainly didn't exist now. He was Ainz Ooal Gown. He was the supreme being of Nazarick, and somehow he had to keep his people safe in the most hostile universe imaginable. "Demiurge," he called through the mental link, "accelerate your intelligence gathering. I want to know everything about the local power structures, military capabilities, and most importantly, everything about this warp and these daemons. If they represent a threat to Nazarick's inhabitants, we must prepare countermeasures immediately." "Your foresight is absolute, Ainz-sama," Demiurge replied, with reverent enthusiasm. "I have already begun formulating 17 distinct strategies for our situation, though I confess they pale in comparison to whatever master plan you have surely already conceived." Ainz hadn't conceived any plan whatsoever, but he certainly wasn't going to admit that. "Continue your work. Report any developments immediately. And Demiurge, ensure Shaltir and the other Guardians understand we are not in the New World anymore. We must assume everything here is more dangerous than anything we have previously encountered. Caution is paramount." "As you will, my lord." Ainz sat back in his throne, skeletal fingers steepled before his face, the very picture of contemplative power. Inside, Suzuki Satoru was screaming. If you crave stories where calculated overlords face the brutal reality of the 41st millennium, hit that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the dark future. What other characters should face the Grimdark? Drop your suggestions in the comments. Outside Nazarick, in the deeper levels of WARHAMMER 4's crust, something stirred. The tomb's arrival had sent ripples through the warp, and those ripples had been noticed. In the Imperium, entities of unspeakable malevolence turned their attention toward this new anomaly, a structure that existed outside causality, protected by forces they could not immediately comprehend, filled with undead that should not be able to think and act with such independence. The Chaos Gods were intrigued, and in the 41st millennium, the interest of the Chaos Gods was never, ever a good thing. Inquisitor Cordelia Vex of the Ordo Xenos received the distress transmission from WARHAMMER 4 exactly 17 hours after Nazarick's arrival. She was aboard her personal frigate, the Eternal Vigil, patrolling the Ultima Segmentum's outer reaches when the garbled Vox message arrived, fragmented and desperate. "Unknown entity, massive displacement, Entire survey teams lost, requesting immediate "Emperor preserve us." Then static. Cordelia stood in her private sanctum, studying the astropathic reports with eyes augmented by the finest mechanicus augmetics her considerable influence could procure. 53 years of service to the Inquisition had taught her to recognize when the Emperor's domain faced genuine threats versus mundane incompetence. This transmission carried the particular quality of genuine terror. "Navigator," she commanded through the Vox network. "Plot course for Vornak 4, maximum speed. Authorize hazardous warp routes if necessary." "At once, Inquisitor," came the reply. Within Nazarick's throne room, Ainz was experiencing what could only be described as a strategic planning session that had spiraled into barely controlled chaos, at least in his own mind. "And once we have established our dominance over the local sector, we can expand systematically, converting the primitive humans into proper subjects of Nazarick," Albedo was saying, her wings fluttering with enthusiasm, as she outlined what amounted to a galactic conquest plan. Demiurge adjusted his glasses, nodding thoughtfully. "Albedo Sama's suggestion has merit, though I would propose a more subtle approach initially. These Imperials number in the quadrillions. Direct confrontation would be inadvisable until we understand the full scope of their military capabilities. However, infiltration, manipulation of existing power structures, and strategic elimination of key leadership figures could destabilize entire subsectors." Ainz listened to his floor guardians discuss plans that ranged from ambitious to absolutely insane, and internally he was screaming. They wanted to conquer a galaxy-spanning civilization. They wanted to go to war with an empire that numbered its soldiers in numbers he couldn't even properly conceptualize. "Your suggestions are noted," Ainz said carefully, "but we must not act rashly. Demiurge, what have you learned from the continued interrogations?" Demiurge's expression shifted into something resembling concern, a rare sight on the Archdevil's normally composed face. "Ainsama, the intelligence I have gathered is troubling. These humans, despite their primitive technology compared to Yggdrasil standards, possess weapons of terrifying destructive capacity. They call them exterminatus protocols, weapons capable of rendering entire planets lifeless. Moreover, their most elite warriors, these space marines, are created through a process that transforms normal humans into beings that approach our own floor guardians in physical capability." That made Ainz sit up straighter. "Approach your level." "Not equivalent," Demiurge clarified quickly, "but far beyond what we encountered in the New World. A single Space Marine chapter, typically 1,000 warriors, can conquer entire star systems, and the Imperium has over 1,000 such chapters. Additionally, they possess psychers, humans with abilities that draw upon this warp dimension I mentioned. These psychers can manipulate reality itself, though the process is extremely dangerous and often results in catastrophic demonic possession." Shaltir Bloodfallen, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "This warp thing, it sounds nasty, like really, really nasty. I was poking around the edges of it with some detection magic, and something poked back. It shuttered, an unusual display for the normally confident vampire."
"Nothing is impossible in the Emperor's domain," Cordelia replied coldly. "Report." "There's a structure beneath the planet's surface, massive, geometric. It shouldn't exist. The planet's crust was thoroughly surveyed, and there was nothing there 3 weeks ago. Now it's just there.
as if it had always existed. Cordelia studied the augur readings with growing concern. The structure was enormous, at least 10 levels deep, with spatial dimensions that didn't match the physical displacement readings. Dimensional manipulation? Usual technology? Or something worse? Prepare my retinue. We're going down there. And Marcus, authorize exterminatus protocols. If we do not return within 12 hours, you are to sterilize this world. Completely. I will not risk whatever is down there spreading. Inquisitor, that's an entire Imperial world. Over 8 million registered citizens. Are acceptable losses if it prevents chaos corruption from spreading. Do you question my authority? No, Inquisitor. The Emperor protects. Indeed he does. Cordelia's retinue consisted of 20 of the finest warriors the Inquisition could provide, 10 stormtroopers in carapace armor, 5 battle sisters from the Order of Our Martyred Lady, 3 sanctioned psychers with their handlers, and 2 tech priests to analyze any Xenos technology they encountered. All were veterans, all had faced horrors that would break normal humans, and all carried enough firepower to level a small fortress. They would need every advantage. The Valkyrie assault carrier descended through Vornok 4th's atmosphere, its engines screaming as it dove toward the coordinates where Facility Gamma 7 had last transmitted. The facility itself appeared intact from aerial reconnaissance, but eerily quiet. No movement, no lights, no life signs. Cordelia's team deployed with military precision, establishing a perimeter while her psychers probed the area for warp signatures. What they found made even their heavily conditioned minds recoil. Inquisitor, there's something beneath us, something that exists but shouldn't. It's not warp-based, not exactly, but it's similar, like a shadow cast by a light source that doesn't exist in our reality. And it's watching us. In Nazarick, alarms chimed across every floor simultaneously. Ainz Sama, Albedo's mental voice carried urgency. We have intruders approaching from the surface. Approximately 30 humanoid entities, all armed with advanced weapons. Several register as possessing strong magical, no, psychic abilities. They are moving with tactical precision toward one of our prisoner-holding facilities. Ainz was already moving toward the throne room's scrying pools. Show me. The magical surveillance activated, displaying the inquisitorial team as they breached Facility Gamma 7's primary entrance. These were not the scared, poorly equipped miners his forces had captured earlier. These were professional soldiers, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of years of combat experience. And leading them was a woman in power armor that radiated both technological sophistication and something else. Faith, perhaps. Or fanatical determination given physical form through warp-derived blessings. Demiurge, assessment, Ainz commanded. The archdevil appeared beside him, studying the scrying pool intently. The leader is what the prisoners called an inquisitor, an agent with nearly unlimited authority to investigate and eliminate threats to the Imperium. The sisters in red armor are battle sisters, warrior nuns enhanced by faith-based psychic abilities. The others appear to be elite soldiers and specialized support personnel. Ainz Sama, this is a significant escalation. If we eliminate them, the Imperium will send more, potentially much more. And if we don't eliminate them, they will investigate, discover our nature, and likely classify us as either Xenos or Chaos corruption. The result will be the same, overwhelming military response. We are in what strategists call a zugzwang. Any move we make worsens our position. Ainz considered his options carefully. The corporate strategist in him recognized Demiurge was right, but perhaps there was a third option. Not elimination, not passive observation, but communication. If this Inquisitor could be reasoned with, if they could demonstrate that Nazarick was not a chaos threat. It was a desperate gambit, but they were in a desperate situation. Prepare the Pleiades for potential combat, but do not engage unless directly threatened. I'm going to attempt communication. If these Imperials are as fanatically devoted to their Emperor as the prisoners indicated, perhaps we can frame ourselves as aligned interests, different methodology, same ultimate goal of opposing chaos. Ainz Ooal Gown, your strategic brilliance knows no bounds, Demiurge said with genuine admiration. To turn the enemy's own beliefs against them, truly you are incomparable. Ainz had no idea if this would work, but he also didn't see any better options, and doing nothing would simply result in Nazarick being discovered eventually, under even worse circumstances. Cordelia's team advanced through Facility Gamma 7's corridors, their Auspex scanners detecting life signs that shouldn't exist. The Imperial personnel were alive, apparently, unharmed, but held in cells that registered as impossibly deep underground, deeper than the facility's original construction allowed. Xenos spatial manipulation, Tech Priest Sigma 7 intoned through his Vox grill. The structure extends far beyond physical dimensional constraints. Recommendation, immediate withdrawal and orbital bombardment. Noted, Cordelia replied, but she didn't order withdrawal. Not yet. She needed to understand what they were facing. The Imperium couldn't afford to destroy every mystery it encountered. Sometimes those mysteries could be weaponized against the Emperor's enemies. They reached the main holding area, where the facility's personnel were imprisoned. Cordelia expected to find corpses, or worse, corrupted cultists babbling praise to the dark gods. Instead, she found Imperial citizens sitting in clean, well-lit cells, apparently unharmed, and eating what looked like actual food rather than corpse-starch rations. Inquisitor, one of the prisoners, Overseer Margrave, according to his uniform markings, pressed against the cell's transparent barrier. Emperor be praised! You've come! We've been held by something. They call themselves servants of Ainz Ooal Gown. They questioned us extensively, but didn't torture or kill anyone. They just talked, asked about the Imperium, about our technology, about our faith. It's been 3 days, and they haven't harmed anyone. Cordelia's mind raced. Xenos that didn't immediately slaughter Imperial citizens. That was unusual, concerning, and potentially exploitable. Where are these captors now? She demanded.
They come and go. The tall one in the butler uniform, he's been ensuring we're fed and treated well. Says his master wants us kept humanely. I don't understand it, Inquisitor. What kind of Xenos acts like this? Before Cordelia could respond, the lights in the corridor flickered and died. Her retinue immediately formed defensive positions, weapons raised, while the Psychers began chanting protective mantras. Then, in the center of the corridor, reality simply folded, and something stepped through. Ainz Ooal Gown appeared before them in his full regalia, ornate robes that seemed to drink in light, skeletal visage that radiated power, and the unmistakable aura of something that should not exist. Behind him, partially visible through the dimensional portal, stood Albedo and Demiurge, their own presences radiating otherworldly menace. "Greetings," Ainz said in perfect High Gothic, his voice carrying power and something approximating diplomatic courtesy. "I am Ainz Ooal Gown, master of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. I understand you have questions. Perhaps we can discuss this without violence." Cordelia stared at the undead monstrosity before her. Every instinct screamed to order her forces to open fire, to call down orbital strikes, to purge this abomination with extreme prejudice. But something stayed her hand. The creature was speaking, negotiating, and most importantly, it had kept Imperial citizens alive when it could have easily slaughtered them. I am Inquisitor Pordelia Vex of the Ordo Xenos. You will explain your presence in Imperial space. You will explain what you are, and you will convince me why I should not have this entire world sterilized to prevent whatever corruption you represent from spreading. You have 60 seconds. Speak. Ainz looked at the weapon pointed at him, at the assembled warriors ready to attack, and internally, Suzuki Satoru was absolutely panicking. But outwardly, Ainz Ooal Gown simply nodded with perfect composure. Then let us talk, and perhaps discover that we are not enemies, not necessarily, not if we are both opposed to the true threats this universe faces.
The negotiations, such as they were, took place in what had been Facility Gamma 7's primary conference room, now subtly altered by Nazarick's presence, the walls reinforced with materials that registered as impossible on the tech priest's auspex scanners, the very air carrying a faint charge of power that made the psychers deeply uncomfortable. Cordelia sat across from Ainz Ooal Gown, separated by a reinforced table that probably wouldn't stop either of them if violence erupted. Her retinue maintained positions around the room's perimeter, weapons ready, but not aimed, a concession Ainz had insisted upon, matched by his own gesture of arriving without visible guards, though Cordelia's psychers confirmed that powerful entities waited just beyond dimensional barriers, ready to tear through reality itself if their master was threatened. "You claim you are not chaos-corrupted," Cordelia said without preamble, her augmetic eyes analyzing every micro-expression on Ainz's skeletal face, which, frustratingly, displayed none. "Yet you are clearly undead. You wield powers that defy Imperial understanding, and you have manifested an entire fortress structure through means that suggest warp manipulation. Give me one reason why I should not execute you immediately and purge this world." Ainz had prepared for this question. Demiurge had provided 17 different potential responses based on his analysis of Imperial psychology and doctrine. Ainz chose the most straightforward. "Because I have no interest in your warp, and it has no claim upon me or my forces. We are not of this universe, Inquisitor. We arrived here 3 days ago through means I am still investigating. Our nature is not warp-derived. We were created through entirely different principles, and most importantly, we have harmed no Imperial citizens beyond temporary detention for information gathering." "You speak of being from beyond this universe," Cordelia said skeptically. "That is not possible. The warp connects all of reality. There is nowhere beyond to come from. And yet, here I am." Ainz gestured to himself with skeletal hands. "I am what your people would classify as an undead creature, yes, but I am not a demon. I do not serve your chaos gods. I do not even acknowledge their authority over existence. Where I come from, undeath is simply another state of being, neither inherently good nor evil, merely different." One of Cordelia's psychers, a thin man with ritual scars covering his shaven head, suddenly convulsed. "Inquisitor, I sense nothing. No warp signature from the creature. No connection to the Imperium at all. It's as if he exists in a blind spot in the warp. But that's impossible. Everything has a warp presence. Everything with consciousness creates ripples in the sea of souls." Ainz felt a small surge of relief that his emotion suppression immediately dampened. So his nature as a Yggdrasil creation did provide some protection from this universe's psychic phenomena. That was valuable intelligence.
As my existence demonstrates, your understanding of impossible may be incomplete, Ainz said carefully. I propose a simple test. Your psychers can examine me, attempt to detect chaos taint, use whatever methods your Inquisition employs to verify purity. If I am corrupted, you will know. If I am not, then perhaps we can discuss this situation rationally. Cordelia considered this for a long moment. It was a reasonable proposal, almost too reasonable, which itself was suspicious, but her instincts, honed over 50 years of hunting genuine chaos threats, were not screaming at her that this creature was tainted. Strange, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But corrupted, she wasn't certain. Very well. But understand, if my psychers detect even the slightest hint of chaos corruption, I will activate exterminatus protocols immediately. This entire world, everyone on it will burn, including your Nazarick. I would expect nothing less from someone dedicated to protecting their people, Ainz replied, and meant it. The Inquisitor's fanaticism was terrifying, but it came from a place of desperate necessity in a universe that seemed designed to destroy humanity at every opportunity. He could respect that, even if he found the methods abhorrent. The examination took 2 hours. Cordelia's psychers probed Ainz with every technique they knew, searching for the telltale corruption signatures that marked chaos taint. They found nothing, not because Ainz was hiding anything, but because he literally had no warp presence to corrupt. He existed outside their conceptual framework, a being from another reality who had been displaced here through no choice of his own. It's clean, the lead psycher finally reported, sounding disturbed by his own conclusion. Not purified or shielded, just absent, as if the warp cannot touch him because he exists in a space the warp does not reach. I have never encountered anything like this. It's deeply unnatural, but it is not chaos. Cordelia absorbed this information, her strategic mind already calculating implications. A being immune to chaos corruption? That was either the greatest asset the Imperium could possibly acquire or the most dangerous threat. Something so alien that even the warp itself rejected it. If you are not chaos, she said slowly, then what are you, and what do you want in the Emperor's domain? Ainz leaned back in his chair, a gesture he had practiced extensively to project calm authority. I am a being from another reality who has been displaced here through no choice of my own. What I want is survival, Inquisitor, for myself and those under my protection. In my original universe, I was a ruler, not through conquest, but through the loyalty of those who chose to follow me. I have no interest in conquering your Imperium or challenging your Emperor. I simply want to understand this universe well enough to exist within it without being destroyed. Noble sentiments, Cordelia said dryly. But in the 31st millennium, survival inevitably means conflict. Resources are finite. Territory is contested. And anything as powerful as your Nazarick will attract attention from forces far more dangerous than one Inquisitor. The ruinous powers have noticed you. Even if they cannot directly corrupt you, they will seek to manipulate, destroy, or weaponize you against the Imperium. What happens then?
Then I defend myself and my people, as I have always done, Ainz replied simply. I am not naive, Inquisitor. I understand this universe operates on brutal principles, but I also understand that allies are more valuable than enemies when circumstances permit. Before Cordelia could respond, klaxons began blaring throughout the facility. One of her stormtroopers pressed a hand to his vox bead, his face going pale. Inquisitor, the Eternal Vigil reports massive warp disturbance in system, multiple hostile contacts translating from the Imperium. Signature matches Emperor's Mercy. It's a Chaos fleet. Estimated strength, 1 battleship, 5 cruisers, multiple escort vessels. They're heading directly for Vornak 4. Cordelia's blood ran cold. A full Chaos fleet? Here? Now? That was too convenient to be coincidence. They'd been drawn by something, likely the massive reality displacement when Nazarick had arrived. The warp had noticed, and now its servants were coming to investigate. She looked at Ainz Ooal Gown and made a decision that would likely end her career if she survived the next few hours. It seems we're about to discover whether your claims of being opposed to chaos are genuine. That fleet will destroy this world looking for you. Will you fight beside the Imperium, or will you flee and leave Imperial citizens to die? Ainz felt his emotion suppression activate repeatedly as panic surged through his mind. A fleet? Chaos forces? He barely understood what chaos was, let alone how to fight it. But he also recognized the moment for what it was, a test and an opportunity. He said, projecting far more confidence than he felt, "I will fight, not for your Imperium necessarily, but against forces that threaten both our survival. Demiurge, Albedo, mobilize all floor guardians. We're going to war." The response through his mental link was immediate and filled with barely restrained excitement. His subordinates had been itching for a proper fight since arriving in this universe. Now they'd get one. In orbit above Vornak 4, the Eternal Vigil detected the incoming Chaos fleet and immediately began emergency protocols. Captain Hadrian, the master of the vessel, had served the Inquisition for 30 years and recognized a suicide mission when he saw one. A single frigate against a Chaos battleship? They'd be torn apart in minutes. "Inquisitor Vex has not ordered evacuation," the Vox operator reported. "She's Empress Teeth. She's requesting we maintain position and prepare for combined operations with an unknown asset." "Unknown asset?" Hadrian demanded. "What asset? There's nothing on this Emperor's Forsaken Rock except mining facilities and—" He stopped, understanding dawning. "The alien structure? She's allied with it?" "Apparently so, Captain. Orders?" Hadrian stared at the tactical display showing the approaching Chaos fleet, and then at the planet below where his Inquisitor was trusting something that by all rights should be destroyed on sight. He'd sworn oaths to serve the Emperor and protect humanity, even when orders seemed insane.
We maintain position, and we pray the Emperor protects. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. The Chaos Fleet translated from the warp with the screaming fury of a reality deeply offended by their existence. The lead battleship, Despoiler's Fang, was a corrupted hulk that had once served the Imperial Navy before falling to Khorne's influence 10,000 years ago. Its hull was decorated with skulls, its weapons blessed by the blood god himself, and its crew was comprised of Chaos Space Marines from the World Eater's Legion, berserkers who lived only to kill. Leading them was Chaos Sorcerer Malachi the Twisted, servant of Tzeentch, who had sensed the dimensional displacement and correctly identified it as something his god would find interesting. A structure outside the warp's influence? Technology that defied the Changer of Ways' understanding? Such things could not be allowed to exist unsupervised.
"Scour the world," Malachi commanded through the Fleet Vox network. "Find the anomaly. Bring me whatever intelligence you can extract before destroying it. The architect of fate wants to understand before unmaking." On the surface, Nazarick's war machine activated with terrifying efficiency. Ainz stood in the throne room projecting tactical overlays through his magical scrying systems, while the floor guardians assembled. His internal panic had been carefully suppressed. Now was not the time to doubt or hesitate. Now was the time to be the supreme being his subordinates believed him to be. "Demiurge, strategic assessment," he commanded. The archdevil stepped forward, his analysis already complete. "Ainz Sama. The enemy fleet consists of vessels corrupted by chaos energies. Their technology is similar to the Imperium's but twisted, less efficient in some ways, more dangerous in others. They possess weapons capable of orbital bombardment that could potentially damage Nazarick's upper levels if we remain passive. However, they have significantly underestimated our capabilities. They do not know what we are or what we can do." "Then we educate them," Ainz said coldly. "Shaltir, Albedo, I want you preparing our elite combat forces. If they attempt ground assault, they will face Nazarick's full defensive might. Cositus, coordinate with Mare on environmental manipulation. Make the surface absolutely lethal to invaders. Aura, deploy your beasts. I want reconnaissance on enemy troop movements the moment they deploy." "Your will be done, Ainz Sama," they chorused with fanatical devotion. Ainz turned to where Cordelia stood, watching this display of coordinated power with analytical interest. "Inquisitor, I suggest you withdraw your vessel to minimum safe distance. What I'm about to do may be dramatic." "My ship stays," Cordelia replied firmly. "If you're about to reveal yourself as a threat worse than chaos, I need to witness it. And if you're genuine, the Imperium needs to document it. Either way, we're not running." Ainz would have smiled if he had lips. Stubborn courage in the face of impossible odds, he could respect that. "Very well, but I recommend your forces take cover. Deep cover." He raised his skeletal hand and began casting magic that this universe had never witnessed before. "Ia Shubnugurath, summon Dark Young." The spell activated, and reality screamed. Not through the warp. Nazarick's magic operated on completely different principles, but reality itself protested as something impossible was pulled into existence. Dark Young, grotesque amalgamations of tentacles and eyes and mouths that served Shubnigaroth in Yggdrasil's mythology, materialized on Vornak 4's surface. Each one was level 90+, capable of crushing tanks like tin cans and regenerating from nearly any damage. Ainz summoned 5 of them. Cordelia's psychers immediately began screaming, not from pain, but from existential horror at witnessing entities that existed but shouldn't, that violated every principle of warp-based reality without drawing upon the warp at all. They were abominations against nature, but they weren't chaos abominations. They were something else entirely. "Emperor, preserve us," one of the battle sisters whispered, making the sign of the Aquila with trembling hands. "What manner of sorcery is this?" "The kind that will save your world," Ainz replied. Demiurge, coordinate the Dark Young with our defensive forces. I want them positioned where they'll do maximum damage when the Chaos forces deploy. And Demiurge, no prisoners. Chaos corruption is too dangerous to risk. Kill them all. As you command, Ainz Ooal, your ruthless wisdom in recognizing the threat is absolute. In orbit, the Chaos Fleet detected the massive magical displacement and immediately changed priorities. Whatever was down there had just revealed itself as both powerful and deeply strange. Malachi consulted his sorcerous instruments, trying to understand what he was detecting, and found his understanding falling apart. "It's not warp-based," he muttered, his voice carrying confusion that bordered on fear, a rare emotion for a 10,000-year-old chaos sorcerer. "It's not psychic, not demonic, not anything I can categorize. It just is. How can power exist without drawing upon the immaterium? How can magic function without drawing upon the immaterium?" His second-in-command, a world-eater chaos lord named Kravax, cared nothing for such philosophical questions. "Does it bleed?" he growled. I don't know." "Then we'll find out. Deploy all forces. Slaughter everything. Blood for the Blood God." Drop pods began launching from the Chaos Fleet, dozens of them, each carrying Chaos Space Marines eager for slaughter. They expected resistance from Imperial Guard, maybe some PDF forces, possibly even a scattered squad of loyalist Space Marines if they were unlucky.
They were not prepared for what waited below. The first wave of drop pods landed in what had been designated Kill Zone Alpha, a section of Vornak 4's surface that Cocytus and Made had spent the last hour converting into a death trap. The Chaos Marines deployed with textbook precision, their corrupted power armor registering the environmental hazards immediately. Then the ground simply opened up beneath them. Mare Beofiore, dressed in his traditional elven attire and looking deceptively innocent, had used earth magic to turn the bedrock into something approximating quicksand. The Chaos Marines sank rapidly, their power armor's weight betraying them, and as they struggled, Cocytus emerged from concealment with an army of ice-based undead warriors. "Weakness disgusts me," the insectoid floor guardian intoned, his mandibles clicking with disdain. "You call yours selves warriors? Face me and know true combat." He charged into the struggling Chaos Marines with 4 arms wielding weapons that could shatter ceramite, and the slaughter began. In Kill Zone Beta, Shaltier Bloodfallen faced a different squad of Chaos Marines, these ones bearing the marks of Slanosh, their armor decorated with obscene symbols that would drive normal humans mad. They opened fire with bolters, the explosive rounds designed to tear through power armor. Shaltier caught a bolt round mid-flight with her bare hand, examined it with theatrical curiosity, then crushed it to powder. "Boring," she declared, her vampiric nature radiating predatory hunger. "You're all so boring. Let me show you what real pleasure looks like, the pleasure of absolute domination." She activated Blood Frenzy and became a crimson blur. The Chaos Marines, enhanced beyond human limits and blessed by a god of excess, lasted approximately 15 seconds before being reduced to component parts, their corrupted blood painting the landscape. In Kill Zone Gamma, the Dark Young that Ainz had summoned encountered a full company of World Eaters, Khorne's chosen, berserkers who knew only rage and slaughter. The two forces met in a collision that registered on seismic sensors, corrupted ceramite against impossible flesh, chain axes against tentacles that regenerated faster than they could be cut. The World Eaters fought with a fury that would have overwhelmed any normal force. Against the Dark Young, they simply died screaming, torn apart by creatures that cared nothing for honor or glory, only for obedience to their summoner's commands. Aboard the Eternal Vigil, Captain Hadrian watched the carnage unfold through auger feeds, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The Xenos forces weren't just winning. They were annihilating Chaos Space Marines, warriors who had conquered worlds and slaughtered billions, as if they were nothing more than poorly trained militia. "Get me a direct Vox link to Inquisitor Vex," he commanded. "She needs to see this. The Emperor needs to know what we've found here." In the throne room, Ainz monitored the battle through his scrying pools, internally amazed and terrified at how effective his forces were. The Chaos Marines were supposed to be elite super soldiers, weren't they? Yet his floor guardians were dismantling them with contemptuous ease. Either Nazarick's power levels were far higher than he'd estimated relative to this universe, or the Chaos forces had significantly underestimated what they were facing. Probably both. Ainz Ooal, Demiurge's mental voice carried satisfaction. The ground forces are being eliminated as predicted. However, I must report that the enemy sorcerer aboard the lead battleship is preparing something significant. Massive warp energy gathering. I believe he intends orbital bombardment with demonically enhanced weapons. Ainz made a decision. "Albedo, you're in command of ground forces. I'm going to deal with that battleship personally." "Ainz Ooal, please allow me to—" "No, this is something I need to do." He stood, summoning his staff, a weapon of pure magical energy that he'd crafted in Yggdrasil's final days. He activated Perfect Unknowable, becoming completely invisible and undetectable, then cast Fly and launched himself toward orbit. Cordelia watched through her armor's external feeds as something shot from Nazarick's position directly toward the Chaos battleship, moving at speeds that should have been impossible without a spacecraft. Her augmetics tracked the projectile, or was it a being, and came to the horrifying conclusion that Ainz Ooal Gown was personally assaulting a Chaos battleship. "Is he insane?" she muttered. "Quite possibly. But Ainz Ooal's strategic brilliance transcends conventional sanity. Watch. Watch and witness what happens when the 41st millennium meets something it cannot categorize or contain." In the void, Ainz reached the Despoiler's fang and dismissed Perfect Unknowable. He wanted them to see him coming, wanted them to understand what they faced. "Reality slash," he intoned, and space itself tore open. The attack cut through the battleship's void shields as if they didn't exist, carved through meters-thick armor plating, and opened the vessel to vacuum. Chaos Marines were sucked into space, screaming futilely, while emergency bulkheads slammed shut. Malachi the Twisted felt genuine fear for the first time in millennia. "What are you?" he screamed through Vox and Warp simultaneously. Ainz's response echoed across every communication channel, a declaration that would be recorded and analyzed for decades. "I am Ainz Ooal Gown, and you have made a grave mistake coming to my territory." The Despoiler's fang burned in the void, sections of its corrupted hull venting atmosphere and corpses into the black. Malachi the Twisted stood in what remained of the bridge, his sorceress wards barely holding against the impossible being that had just carved through a Chaos battleship like parchment. Through the shattered viewport, he could see Ainz Ooal Gown hovering in the vacuum of space. No environmental suit, no protection, simply existing where existence should be impossible. The skeletal figure raised one hand,
and Malachi felt his precognitive senses, gifts from Zinch himself, simply fail. He couldn't predict what would happen next. The Changer of Ways couldn't see this being's future because this being operated outside fate itself. "Impossible," Malachi whispered, then louder, channeling the warp's power. "You dare challenge the ruinous powers? You dare exist without their blessing? I am Malachi the Twisted, chosen of Zinch. I have unraveled the fates of entire star systems. I will—" "Grasp heart," Ainz said simply. The spell activated. In Yggdrasil, it was a mid-tier instant death spell with a secondary crushing effect. In the 40K universe, against the being who had served chaos for 10,000 years and whose body was more warp stuff than flesh, it should have failed completely. It didn't. Malachi's physical heart, what little remained of it after millennia of mutations, simply stopped. The warp energies sustaining him tried to compensate, to regenerate, to preserve their chosen vessel. But Ainz's magic operated on principles the warp couldn't counter because it couldn't comprehend them. Death magic from Yggdrasil didn't kill through biological failure or psychic disruption. It simply declared the target dead, and reality adjusted to match that declaration. The Chaos Sorcerer collapsed, his staff clattering to the deck, his final expression one of absolute incomprehension. He had served the god of change for 100 centuries, had witnessed infinite possibilities and impossible transformations, but he had never imagined something could exist so utterly outside the warp's influence that even his god's protection meant nothing. Ainz floated through the breach in the battleship's hull, maintaining his fly spell while examining the corrupted interior. The walls were covered in blasphemous runes that hurt to look at. Even his undead eye sockets registered pain, which was deeply concerning. The air was thick with what Demiurge had called warp corruption, a psychic miasma that sought to twist and change everything it touched. He cast life essence as a precaution, checking if the corruption could affect his undead form. The diagnostic spell returned confusing results. The warp energies were trying to corrupt him, but they couldn't find purchase. It was like watching water try to wet something that existed in a space where wetness wasn't a valid concept. The corruption slid off his essence, unable to take hold. Good. That meant he could operate in these environments without immediate risk. But he needed to be careful. Just because he was personally immune didn't mean the corruption couldn't affect Nazarick or his subordinates through more indirect means. "Ainz-sama!" Demiurge's mental voice carried urgency. "The remaining chaos vessels are breaking formation. 4 are attempting to flee into the warp. 1, a heavy cruiser, is on a collision course with Warhammer 4. They intend to crash it into the planet's surface, likely targeting Nazarick directly." Ainz processed this quickly. A ship-sized projectile moving at orbital velocities would hit with the force of multiple nuclear weapons. Nazarick's defenses could probably withstand it, but the collateral damage to the surrounding area would be catastrophic. All those Imperial citizens, the mining facilities, entire settlements, gone. He couldn't allow that, not if he wanted to maintain even tentative cooperation with the Inquisitor. "Gate," he cast, opening a massive portal directly in the cruiser's path. The ship, traveling at thousands of kilometers per hour, plunged through the dimensional rift without time to alter its course. Ainz redirected the portal's exit point to empty space, several astronomical units away from any inhabited bodies. The cruiser emerged in the void, its crew undoubtedly confused about their sudden relocation, and exploded seconds later as its already damaged reactor finally failed. Problem solved. He opened another magic gate to Nazarick's throne room, stepped through, and allowed himself a moment of relief that his emotion suppression immediately dampened. That had worked. His magic was effective against chaos forces. They could fight in this universe. But as he materialized in the throne room, he found it was not empty.
Inquisitor Cordelia Vex stood before his throne, surrounded by her full retinue with weapons raised.
But more concerning was the additional figure who had arrived while he was in orbit. A space marine in ornate power armor decorated with Imperial iconography and purity seals, his very presence radiating authority and barely controlled fury. Librarian Theron of the Blood Ravens chapter, Demiurge's mental voice supplied helpfully. A psyker warrior of considerable power. He arrived via teleportarium while you were engaged with the Chaos Fleet. I apologize, Ainz, but I determined that preventing his arrival would create more problems than allowing it. Ainz studied the Space Marine carefully. The warrior stood nearly as tall as Ainz himself, his power armor massive and adorned with chapter symbols. But it was the psychic presence that concerned Ainz most. This librarian was actively probing Nazarick with warp-based senses, trying to understand what he was detecting. "You destroyed a Chaos battleship," Theron stated, his voice carrying the deep resonance of someone whose lungs had been replaced with enhanced organs. "Single-handedly, without drawing upon the warp, without invoking the Emperor's name, without any of the signs or methods we have used for 10,000 years. He took a step forward. "What are you?" Ainz maintained his composure, projecting supreme confidence while internally screaming. A space marine? Demiurge's intelligence had indicated these were among the most dangerous warriors in the Imperium. Genetically enhanced, psychologically conditioned, equipped with the finest weapons the Mechanicus could provide. And this one was a librarian, meaning he wielded psychic powers on top of superhuman physical abilities. "I am Ainz Ooal Gown, and I am precisely what I told Inquisitor Vex, a being from another reality, displaced here through circumstances beyond my control. I destroyed that Chaos fleet because it threatened both my people and yours. Is that not sufficient?" "No," Theron replied flatly. "The Imperium does not trust convenient saviors who appear from nowhere. We have learned through 10,000 years of bitter experience that every gift comes with hidden costs. You claim immunity to chaos corruption. You demonstrate powers that operate outside the warp's principles. You command forces that register as abominations against nature itself. These are not the traits of allies. They are the traits of threats we have not yet classified." "And yet," Cordelia interjected, stepping between them, "he did save this world. I witnessed his floor guardians annihilate Chaos Space Marines with contemptuous ease. I watched him personally destroy a ship that could have razed this planet. Whatever he is, librarian, he is not our enemy. Not today." "Not today," Theron agreed. "But tomorrow, next week, when he understands the Imperium's weaknesses and decides we are obstacles to his goals. What then, Inquisitor?" Ainz listened to them debate his existence as if he weren't standing right there, and found himself strangely sympathetic to both positions. Cordelia was being pragmatic. They'd faced a common enemy and survived through cooperation. Theron was being cautious. Trusting unknowns in the 41st millennium was how civilizations fell. Both were correct. "Perhaps," Ainz said, interrupting their argument. "Librarian Theron, you are a psyker, correct? You can probe minds, detect truth from lies, discern intentions?" "I can," Theron confirmed warily. "Then probe me. Examine my thoughts, my intentions, my goals. Use whatever psychic methods your chapter employs to verify truth. If you find evidence that I intend harm to the Imperium, I will not resist your judgment. But if you find that I am genuine in seeking peaceful coexistence, then perhaps we can move past this standoff."
It was a calculated risk. Ainz had no idea if his Yggdrasil-derived consciousness could be read by warp-based psychers, but he suspected it couldn't. His nature seemed to exist in a blind spot to this universe's psychic phenomena, and if Theron tried and failed, it would demonstrate Ainz's claims of being outside the warp's influence. Theron studied Ainz for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. But know this, Xenos. If I detect even the slightest taint of chaos, the slightest indication of deception, I will call down my entire chapter upon this world. We will purge everything and damn the consequences." "Understood." The librarian approached, his psychic presence intensifying as he prepared to delve into Ainz's mind. His eyes began to glow with eldritch light, warp energies coalescing around his head like a crown of invisible fire. He reached out with psychic tendrils, seeking to pierce Ainz's consciousness and read his innermost thoughts. The probe hit Ainz's mind and simply stopped. It wasn't blocked or deflected. It didn't encounter a wall or barrier. The psychic energy simply reached a point where Ainz's consciousness existed and found nothing to grip. It was like trying to read the mind of a void or interrogate a mathematical equation. Ainz had thoughts, memories, intentions, but they existed in a substrate that the warp couldn't access because that substrate wasn't connected to the immaterium. Theron's eyes widened. He pushed harder, drawing upon decades of training and the genetic gifts of his Primarch. The psychic pressure intensified to levels that would have destroyed an unprotected mind, would have reduced a normal human to a drooling vegetable. Ainz felt nothing, except slight confusion.
"Impossible," Theron whispered, staggering back. "There's nothing there. Not nothing as in emptiness. Nothing as in the concept of mind doesn't apply in the normal way. You think, you reason, you have consciousness, but it's all happening in a space the warp cannot reach. Emperor's mercy, what are you?" "I am a being from a universe where souls and consciousness work differently," Ainz replied, fighting to keep relief out of his voice. It had worked. The gambit had paid off. "I am not lying when I say I mean the Imperium no harm. I simply want to survive in this universe long enough to find a way home, or at least establish a safe existence for my people. Is that so difficult to accept?" Cordelia and Theron exchanged glances, having a silent conversation through looks and minute gestures that spoke of years working together in the Inquisition's service. Finally, Theron nodded slowly. "The Imperium will watch you. My chapter will maintain surveillance on this world. If you prove trustworthy, we may even find common cause. The Emperor knows we need every advantage against chaos. But if you betray this tentative peace, know that the Blood Ravens will be the ones who bring you to account." "I would expect nothing less," Ainz replied honestly. The crisis for now had passed, but Ainz knew this was only the beginning. Word would spread through the Imperium about Nazarick's existence. Other factions would come, some seeking alliance, others seeking destruction, and eventually the truly dangerous powers would take notice. Over the next several weeks, Nazarick established a cautious working relationship with the local Imperial authorities. Ainz, operating through Demiurge's carefully crafted diplomatic frameworks, negotiated a treaty that granted Nazarick autonomous status in exchange for mutual defense agreements and intelligence sharing about chaos activities. It was an imperfect arrangement that satisfied no one completely, which Demiurge assured Ainz meant it was actually quite good as far as diplomatic agreements went. But not everyone in the 41st millennium was pleased by these developments. In the Eye of Terror, where reality itself screamed and the Chaos Gods held court, the four ruinous powers had taken notice of Nazarick's existence. They had watched Malaki fail, they had witnessed magic that operated without the warp, and they had recognized something that threatened their fundamental nature. Beings who could act in real space without drawing upon the immaterial.
Khorne cared nothing for such philosophical concerns. He simply wanted blood, and Nazarick had spilled much chaos blood. They were enemies, and enemies must be destroyed. Tzeentch was fascinated. An entity outside fate itself, a structure that defied prediction. Such things were either the greatest threat to his schemes or the greatest opportunity. He would manipulate, test, and ultimately decide. Nurgle saw potential. Death that wasn't connected to entropy, undeath that didn't rot. Such unnatural preservation offended his sensibilities. He would send his plagues, and they would learn that all things decay eventually. Slaanesh sensed emptiness. Beings without souls in the traditional sense, without the full spectrum of emotions to corrupt and pervert. How dreadfully boring. But perhaps they could be made interesting. Perhaps they could be taught to truly feel. The Chaos Gods began making plans. Meanwhile, in the void between stars, another faction had noticed Nazarick's arrival. The Necrons, ancient Xenos who had warred against the Old Ones before humanity existed, detected dimensional anomalies that reminded them uncomfortably of the Satan, the star gods they had imprisoned eons ago. Their tomb world on Vornok 4th's moon had been dormant for 60 million years. It began to wake. And in the webway, the Craftworld Eldar who monitored this region of space saw portents in their runes. A new player had entered the eternal game, something their seers could not read, could not predict, could not categorize. The Farseers of Craftworld Oathway convened an emergency council. The threads of fate are tangled. A knot has appeared in the skein that should not exist, and I fear its untangling will require us to make contact with this Overlord Ainz. Whether as allies or enemies, I cannot say. The future has become unclear. Even the Tau Empire, ever seeking to expand their greater good, picked up fragmentary reports of the events at Vornok 4th. Their water-caste diplomats began analyzing whether this Nazarick might be convinced to join their cause, while Firecaste commanders prepared contingencies for if diplomacy failed. Back in Nazarick, blissfully unaware of the galaxy-spanning attention they'd attracted, Ainz sat in his private chambers, one of the few places where he could drop his supreme being facade and just be Suzuki Satoru, terrified and overwhelmed.
"This is insane," he muttered to the empty room. "I fought one Chaos fleet, and now everyone in the entire galaxy probably knows we exist. The Imperium is watching us. Chaos wants us dead, and I still don't understand half the threats in this universe." A soft knock at his door. "Ainz-sama, may I enter?" "Albedo." Ainz quickly recomposed himself, straightening his robes and assuming the posture of an all-knowing overlord. "Enter." The overseer of the floor guardians stepped inside, her golden eyes luminous in the dim light. "Forgive the intrusion, Ainz-sama, but I felt I should report something that concerns me. Shaltir has been different since the battle with the Chaos forces. She says the warp tried to speak to her during combat, whispered promises of power, of blood, of eternal pleasure. She resisted, of course. Her loyalty to you is absolute, but the fact that it could reach her at all is troubling. Ainz felt his panic return. He'd known the Floor Guardians weren't completely immune. They had souls, or something approximating souls, unlike his own purely undead consciousness. If chaos could corrupt them, increase monitoring of all Floor Guardians and their subordinates. If any show signs of corruption, they are to be isolated immediately and examined. We cannot afford to lose anyone to chaos influence. As you command, Ainz Sama, your foresight in anticipating this threat is... Stop. The word came out sharper Ainz intended. He softened his tone. Albedo, I need you to understand something. I am not all-knowing. I am not infallible. I make mistakes. I miss details. I fear things I do not understand. The image you and the others have of me as a perfect, supreme being, it's not accurate. I am just doing my best, trying to keep everyone safe in a universe that seems designed to kill us all.
Ainz Sama, did you think we did not know? We are your creations, born from the Supreme Being's designs. We know you carry burdens that would break lesser beings. We know you struggle with decisions that have no good outcomes. And we love you for it. Not because you are perfect, but because you care enough to try. Because you fight to protect us even when you are afraid. That is what makes you worthy of our loyalty. Ainz felt something crack in his chest. The emotion suppression working overtime to contain feelings he couldn't quite name. Relief? Gratitude? Hope? Thank you, Albedo. That means more than you know. After she left, Ainz sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. They'd survived their first major conflict in the 40K universe. They'd established tentative diplomatic relations with the Imperium. They'd proven they could fight chaos forces effectively. But this was just the beginning. Bigger threats were coming. Harder choices awaited. And eventually, he would have to decide what Nazarick truly was in this universe. Conquerors? Defenders? Or something else entirely? He pulled up a holographic display showing Vornak 4th and the surrounding space, marking all known threats and potential allies. The strategic situation was complex, dangerous, and constantly evolving. Just like a really difficult raid. Except the raid is an entire galaxy. The boss fights are literal gods, and there's no respawn. He stood, straightened his robes, and prepared to return to the throne room. The Floor Guardians would be waiting for orders. The Imperium would be sending more observers. Chaos would be plotting revenge. And somewhere out there, other factions were taking notice. Ainz Ooal Gown, the Sorcerer King, the Supreme Being of Nazarick, had arrived in the 41st millennium.
3 months after Nazarick's arrival in the 41st millennium, the political landscape of the Ultima Segmentum had fundamentally shifted. What had been a relatively stable, by 40K standards, region of Imperial space now hosted a wildcard that no faction could ignore or adequately predict. In the Fortress Monastery of the Blood Ravens, Chapter Master Gabriel Angelos studied the reports compiled by Librarian Theron with growing unease. The document sprawled across his desk was 50 pages of analysis, conjecture, and disturbing observations about the entity calling itself Ainz Ooal Gown and his Great Tomb of Nazarick.
They've kept their word, Gabriel said, his scarred face illuminated by the flickering light of blessed candles. Every intelligence agreement has been honored. They've provided warning of 3 separate chaos incursions, allowing us to intercept before catastrophic damage occurred. Their floor guardians have fought alongside our battle brothers against orc raiders. By all measurable metrics, they are proving to be valuable allies. And yet, Theron prompted, knowing there was more. And yet they remain fundamentally unknowable, Gabriel continued, his voice heavy with concern. We cannot read their thoughts. We cannot predict their actions through divination. We cannot assess their true strength because they reveal only what they choose to reveal. Every strategic doctrine we possess for evaluating threats becomes useless when applied to them. They are a blind spot in the Emperor's sight, Theron. That alone makes them dangerous, regardless of their current cooperation. Theron nodded slowly. I have been monitoring the entity Ainz closely. He presents himself as a supreme ruler, an overlord of unquestionable authority, but I have observed moments, brief, easily missed, where the facade slips. Hesitation before making decisions, consultation with his subordinates that suggests he does not, in fact, have all the answers. I believe the Supreme Being persona is partially theatrical, meaning he is more vulnerable than he appears, which could be exploited if necessary, but also means he is capable of growth, adaptation, and potentially genuine alliance. A being who knows his own limitations is more trustworthy than one who believes himself infallible. Gabriel considered this carefully. In the 41st millennium, trust was a currency spent sparingly and earned at a great cost. But the chapter needed allies. The Imperium was bleeding from 1,000 wounds, and anything that could staunch even one was valuable. Continue observation, but prepare contingencies. If Nazarick becomes a threat, we must be ready to respond with overwhelming force before they fully understand this universe's rules and become unstoppable.
Sebas stood before the throne, his normally impeccable composure visibly strained. Behind him, restrained by magical bindings, knelt 3 emaciated humans, former slaves from a noble's estate that Sebas had discovered during a reconnaissance mission. Ainz, Sebas began, his voice carrying quiet intensity. I must confess that I acted without explicit orders. I discovered these individuals being systematically tortured for their captors' amusement. I could not simply observe and report. I intervened, killed the slavers, and freed their prisoners. I understand this may have political consequences, but I could not reconcile inaction with my fundamental nature. Ainz looked at the 3 humans, malnourished, covered in scars both old and fresh, their eyes holding the hollowed-out look of people who had forgotten what hope looked like. Then he looked at Sebas, seeing genuine moral conflict in his creation's face. This was a test, Ainz realized, not of Sebas, but of himself, of what Nazarick would become in this universe. In the New World, they had conquered the Riastai's kingdom through manipulation and calculated cruelty.
Demiurge's schemes had resulted in thousands of deaths, all justified as necessary for Nazarick's security and dominance. Ainz had approved those plans, while internally uncomfortable with the methods, but unable to articulate why or propose alternatives. Here in the 40K universe, that approach wouldn't work. The Imperium dealt in planetary-scale atrocities as standard operating procedure. They wouldn't be shocked or cowed by conventional ruthlessness. And if Nazarick simply became another faction pursuing power through cruelty, they'd eventually face extinction from beings who had millennia more experience with such tactics.
But more importantly, and this was the thought that crystallized in Ainz's mind with sudden clarity, he didn't want to be that kind of ruler anymore. Suzuki Satoru had been a salaryman in a dystopian corporate hellscape. He'd experienced powerlessness, exploitation, dehumanization. And now he had power, genuine, overwhelming power. He could choose what to do with it. "Sebas," Ainz said slowly, "you acted in accordance with your fundamental character, the values that your Creator, Touch Me, designed into your very being. You saw injustice and could not abide it. I will not punish you for that. In fact, I believe you have reminded me of something important. We are not in the new world anymore. The rules here are different, and perhaps we can be different as well." He gestured toward the freed slaves. "Provide them with medical care, food, and sanctuary within Nazarick's outer precincts. When they have recovered, offer them a choice. They may leave if they wish, or they may join our organization in whatever capacity suits their talents. No coercion, no binding contracts, just a genuine offer of new life." The throne room fell silent. Albedo's expression flickered through several emotions: confusion, concern, and something that might have been approval. Demiurge adjusted his glasses, clearly recalculating dozens of strategic plans based on this new direction. "Ainz-sama," Demiurge ventured carefully, "this represents a significant departure from our previous operational doctrine. The Imperium's nobility routinely engages in such practices. If we position ourselves as opposed to their cultural norms, we risk creating unnecessary enemies." "Perhaps," Ainz acknowledged. "But we also risk losing ourselves in this universe's cruelty if we simply adopt its worst practices. We have power, Demiurge, real power. Let us use it to build something worth protecting, not just another empire of suffering." He paused, then added with calculated vulnerability, "Unless you believe I am making a strategic error, I value your counsel." Demiurge's eyes widened fractionally. Ainz-sama was asking for his opinion, genuinely seeking advice rather than testing him? The archdevil's mind raced through implications, and he arrived at a conclusion that surprised even himself. "No, Ainz-sama," he said slowly. "I believe this may be strategically brilliant. The Imperium operates through fear and oppression because they face threats that justify extreme measures. But they also suffer constant rebellion, defection, and internal decay because their people have nothing to hope for except slightly delayed death. If Nazarick can offer genuine sanctuary, a place where competence and loyalty are rewarded, where individuals have value beyond their utility as ammunition, we become something unique in this universe, a beacon that attracts the talented, the desperate, and the idealistic who have nowhere else to turn. Ainz felt relief wash through him, immediately suppressed. Demiurge had not only accepted the new direction, but had rationalized it in strategic terms that the other floor guardians could understand. Perfect. Precisely my thinking, Ainz lied smoothly. We will not be conquerors in the traditional sense. We will be builders of something this universe has forgotten is possible. And in doing so, we will accumulate power far more durable than what can be taken by force alone. As the floor guardians dispersed to implement this new vision, Ainz allowed himself a moment of genuine hope. Maybe they could survive here. Maybe they could even thrive. Maybe. Reality tore open in the center of the throne room. Not a gate spell, not a dimensional portal of any kind Ainz recognized. This was the warp itself, bleeding through into real space with the sick-sweet wrongness of fundamental laws being violated. And through that tear stepped something that made even Ainz's emotionless undead nature recoil. It was humanoid in the loosest sense. Tall, impossibly beautiful, with features that shifted between masculine and feminine with each heartbeat that shouldn't exist. Its skin was the color of fresh bruises, its eyes held infinite depths of forbidden pleasures, and its very presence radiated a corruption that made the air itself taste of excess. A keeper of secrets, greater demon of Slaanesh, and it was inside Nazarick. At last, the demon purred, its voice carrying harmonics that sought to bypass hearing and directly stimulate the brain's pleasure centers. The mysterious Overlord who exists outside the great game. I am Nkari, chosen of she who thirsts, and I have come to make you a proposal.
Ainz's mind raced. A daemon, inside his fortress, past all defenses? This should have been impossible. Nazarick's wards were designed to prevent unauthorized teleportation, and they'd been reinforced since learning about the warp. But chaos, it seemed, operated on rules that didn't care about impossibility. Floor guardians, defensive positions, he commanded through the mental link, while externally maintaining perfect composure. Nkari, was it? You have invaded my domain uninvited. I should destroy you for this transgression. You should, the daemon agreed, circling with predatory grace, but you won't, because you are curious, because you are isolated in a universe you don't understand, and I represent knowledge, because, most importantly, you are afraid. Oh, your delicious fear, even suppressed by your undead nature, it tastes exquisite. And fear makes even the mighty consider offers they would normally reject. The Keeper of Secrets was right, and that terrified Ainz more than anything. The daemon hadn't attacked. It had come to talk, which meant it knew something he didn't, had some plan that required his cooperation or at least his attention. Speak then, Ainz commanded, but know that I have killed daemons before. Your kind does not frighten me. Lie, Nkari said with a musical laugh, but an impressive one. Very well. I come bearing a message from the Prince of Pleasure herself. Slaanesh finds you interesting. A being without a soul in the traditional sense, yet clearly possessing consciousness and will. Your subordinates have souls, delicious, complex souls, but they are bound to you in ways the warp cannot easily sever. You have created something unique. The daemon paused, and its expression shifted to something almost genuine.
The other gods wish to destroy you. Khorne sees you as an enemy who spills blood without offering it to him. Nurgle sees your undeath as an affront to natural decay. Tzeentch sees you as a variable he cannot predict and therefore must eliminate. But Slaanesh, she sees potential. She offers you a bargain.
I'm listening, Ainz said carefully, while simultaneously preparing his most powerful attack spells. Knowledge for service. We will teach you the true nature of this universe, the warp's secrets, the Imperium's weaknesses, the ways to shield your subordinates from corruption. We will show you how to thrive in the 41st millennium. All we ask in return is occasional cooperation, small favors, nothing that would compromise your precious moral flexibility. And the price? Ainz asked. There's always a price with chaos. Oh, you are learning, Inkari purred. The price is simple. You acknowledge Slaanesh's existence. You do not swear loyalty. You do not worship. You simply accept that she who thirsts has a claim on passion, ambition, and the pursuit of perfection. When your subordinates strive for excellence in their duties, when they take pride in their achievements, when they feel the rush of accomplishment, Slaanesh will taste that and be satisfied. It was a trap. Ainz knew it was a trap. Chaos didn't make offers without hidden costs that would reveal themselves at the worst possible moment. But it was also tempting. Knowledge was what Nazarick desperately needed. Understanding of this universe's rules could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. No, Ainz said firmly. I refuse your offer. Whatever knowledge you possess, whatever advantages you promise, I will not bind myself or my subordinates to a chaos god. Not even tangentially, not even symbolically. We will learn this universe's secrets on our own terms. The Keeper of Secrets laughed, a sound like crystal breaking mixed with screaming. Integrity. In the 41st millennium, you truly are from another reality. Then it bowed, mockingly elegant. Very well, we gave you a chance to do this easily. Now we will teach you what rejection of the Dark Prince costs. Enjoy your integrity, Ainz Ooal Gown. I wonder how much of it will remain when your precious floor guardians start falling to corruption one by one.
The demon vanished, the warp tear sealing behind it, leaving only the lingering smell of corruption and excess. Ainz slumped in his throne the moment he was certain Inkari had truly departed. That had been close, too close. The demon had found a weakness, his fear of losing his subordinates to chaos corruption, and had offered exactly what he needed to protect them. If he'd been slightly more desperate, slightly less cautious, he might have accepted. Ainz-sama demurged appeared, his expression darker than Ainz had ever seen. That demon penetrated our defenses as if they didn't exist. That should not be possible. Our wards, our magical barriers, our dimensional locks, all useless against a sufficiently powerful warp entity. I know, Ainz said quietly. Which means we need to fundamentally rethink our security. We can't rely solely on Yggdrasil-based magic. We need to understand how this universe's defenses work and integrate them with our own. I may be able to help with that, came a new voice. Inquisitor Cordelia Vex, appearing through a more conventional entrance, accompanied by Librarian Farron. My apologies for the intrusion, but when your fortress registered a massive warp incursion, we came immediately. What happened? Ainz made a split-second decision: trust or isolation. The Inquisitor had proven reliable so far. The Space Marine was cautious but honorable, and Nazarick desperately needed allies who understood chaos. "A keeper of secrets manifested in my throne room," he said bluntly. "It offered a bargain on behalf of Slaanesh. I refused. Now I expect retaliation from the Chaos Gods, and I need to know how the Imperium protects against such incursions." Cordelia and Theron exchanged looks of genuine alarm. "A keeper of secrets," Farron repeated slowly. "A greater demon of Slaanesh manifested inside your fortress, and you survived. Moreover, you refused its bargain. Do you understand how rare that is? How many have fallen to lesser temptations?" "I have some idea," Ainz replied, "which is why I'm asking for help. My people have powers the Chaos Gods cannot directly corrupt, but they can be manipulated, isolated, and worn down psychologically. I need to know the Imperium's methods for resisting chaos, for maintaining morale in the face of eternal war, for keeping faith when everything seems hopeless."
Cordelia stepped forward, and for the first time since they'd met, Ainz saw something approximating respect in her augmetic eyes. "You were asking us to share some of the Imperium's most closely guarded secrets, the psychological conditioning, the faith-based protections, the methods we've developed over 10,000 years of fighting chaos. That is not information we share lightly." "I'm not asking lightly," Ainz replied. "I'm asking as someone who just rejected a Chaos God's offer and now faces the consequences. Help me protect my people, and I will help you protect yours. A genuine alliance, Inquisitor. Not one of convenience or temporary necessity, but one based on shared purpose, denying chaos its victims." The silence stretched. Then Cordelia nodded slowly. "Very well, but this goes beyond my authority. We will need to involve the chapter masters, possibly even the sector lords. You're asking to formally integrate with Imperial defensive networks to become a recognized, if unusual, ally of the Imperium of Man. That is a political maelstrom that will take months to navigate." "Then we begin navigating," Ainz said, "because I suspect we don't have months. Chaos doesn't wait patiently for bureaucracy to resolve itself." As if to punctuate his words, alarms began blaring throughout Nazarick. Demiurge's voice echoed through the mental link with barely controlled panic. "Ainz-sama, multiple warp rifts opening throughout the Vornax system, daemon incursions on 7 separate moons, and a chaos fleet has just translated from the warp. It's 3 times the size of the last one, led by a ship that registers as Emperor's Mercy. That's a Blackstone fortress. A corrupted Blackstone fortress. Ainz-sama, we're facing an extinction-level threat." Ainz stood, his skeletal hands gripping his staff with enough force to crack lesser materials. This was it, the real test. Not a single fleet they could defeat through surprise, but a coordinated assault by forces that had millennia of experience destroying things they didn't understand. "Sound general quarters," he commanded, his voice carrying through every floor of Nazarick. "All floor guardians to combat positions. Activate every defense we possess. And someone tell me we have a plan for fighting a Blackstone fortress, because I have no idea what that even is. It's a superweapon from the war in heaven, ancient beyond measure, capable of destroying stars themselves. If chaos has corrupted one and brought it here specifically to end Nazarick, Ainz Ooal Gown, you may have just become the most important strategic asset or threat in this entire sector. Because if you fall, chaos gains confidence. And if you survive, you prove that even the ruinous powers can be defied. Ainz processed this as he strode toward Nazarick's command center, his subordinates falling into step behind him, the Imperial's forces mobilizing alongside his own, and somewhere above them, a corrupted superweapon preparing to test whether beings from outside this universe could truly defy the fundamental rules that had governed the 41st millennium for 10,000 years. "Then let us give them a lesson in defiance," Ainz declared, channeling every ounce of false confidence he possessed. "They want to make an example of us? Fine, we'll make an example of them. We'll show this entire galaxy that Nazarick does not kneel, not to tyrants, not to chaos, not to gods." And in the warp, the 4 chaos gods watched with anticipation. One way or another, this would be entertaining.
Cordelia stepped forward, and for the first time since they'd met, Ainz saw something approximating respect in her augmetic ties. "You are asking us to share some of the Imperium's most closely guarded secrets, the psychological conditioning, the faith-based protections, the methods we've developed over 10,000 years of fighting chaos. That is not information we share lightly." "I'm not asking lightly," Ainz replied. "I'm asking as someone who just rejected a Chaos God's offer and now faces the consequences. Help me protect my people, and I will help you protect yours. A genuine alliance, Inquisitor. Not one of convenience or temporary necessity, but one based on shared purpose, denying chaos its victims." The silence stretched. Then Cordelia nodded slowly. "Very well, but this goes beyond my authority. We will need to involve the chapter masters, possibly even the sector lords. You're asking to formally integrate with Imperial defensive networks to become a recognized, if unusual, ally of the Imperium of Man. That is a political maelstrom that will take months to navigate." "Then we begin navigating," Ainz said. "Because I suspect we don't have months. Chaos doesn't wait patiently for bureaucracy to resolve itself." As if to punctuate his words, alarms began blaring throughout Nazarick. Demiurge's voice echoed through the mental link with barely controlled panic. "Ainz Sama, multiple warp rifts opening throughout the Vornok system, demon incursions on 7 separate moons, and the Chaos Fleet has just translated from the warp. It's 3 times the size of the last one, led by a ship that registers as Emperor's Mercy. That's a Blackstone fortress, a corrupted Blackstone fortress. Ainz Sama, we're facing an extinction-level threat."
Ainz stood, his skeletal hands gripping his staff with enough force to crack lesser materials. This was it, the real test. Not a single fleet they could defeat through surprise, but a coordinated assault by forces that had millennia of experience destroying things they didn't understand. "Sound general quarters," he commanded, his voice carrying through every floor of Nazarick. "All floor guardians to combat positions. Activate every defense we possess. And someone tell me we have a plan for fighting a Blackstone fortress, because I have no idea what that even is." "It's a superweapon from the war in heaven," Theron explained grimly. "Ancient beyond measure, capable of destroying stars themselves. If chaos has corrupted one and brought it here specifically to end Nazarick, Ainz Ooal Gown, you may have just become the most important strategic asset or threat in this entire sector. Because if you fall, chaos gains confidence, and if you survive, you prove that even the ruinous powers can be defied."
"Then let us give them a lesson in defiance," Ainz declared, channeling every ounce of false confidence he possessed. "We want to make an example of us? Fine, we'll make an example of them. We'll show this entire galaxy that Nazarick does not kneel, not to tyrants, not to chaos, not to gods." And in the warp, the 4 chaos gods watched with anticipation. One way or another, this would be entertaining.
The Battle of Vornak 4 lasted 14 hours and reshaped the political landscape of the Ultima Segmentum forever. The corrupted Blackstone fortress Abyssal Crown descended with the fury of a dying god, its weapons capable of unmaking planets turned toward a single target, Nazarick. But Ainz Ooal Gown had learned the most important lesson of the 41st millennium. Survival required not just power, but adaptation, cooperation, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for those under your protection. When the fortress opened fire, it found not a static target, but a mobile one. Mare Bellofiore had used earth magic on a scale that defied belief, literally moving Nazarick through the planet's mantle while maintaining structural integrity. The bombardment that should have annihilated them instead carved massive craters across Vornak 4's surface, devastating but not fatal. Simultaneously, Ainz deployed a strategy that would be studied in Imperial tactical academies for decades. He didn't fight the Blackstone fortress. He teleported directly onto it with his strongest floor guardians and systematically disabled it from within, using the very methods he'd learned fighting raids in Yggdrasil. Shaltir dueled corrupted champions of Khorne. Cocytus held corridors against demon hordes, and Ainz himself faced the fortress's Chaos Lord in single combat, proving that even ancient evils could fall to 10th-tier magic they had no defense against. The Abyssal Crown fell from orbit, its corrupted machine spirit screaming as it died, and crashed into Vornak 4's largest ocean. The resulting tsunami killed thousands, but Nazarick's intervention had saved millions. More importantly, it had proven something the Imperium desperately needed to believe, that chaos could be defeated, even by those who didn't draw upon the Emperor's light. In the months that followed, Nazarick became what Demiurge had predicted, a beacon. Refugees from worlds ravaged by chaos sought sanctuary beneath Ainz's protection. Skilled workers, soldiers, even a handful of rogue space marines found themselves welcomed, evaluated on merit rather than birth, and given genuine purpose beyond survival. The tomb that had crashed into this universe as a terrified refugee became a power that even the High Lords of Terra couldn't ignore. Ainz Ooal Gown stood in his throne room, reviewing reports of their growing influence, their expanding network of allies, and the dozen new threats that emerged daily. He was still terrified, still uncertain. Still Suzuki Satoru beneath the skeletal facade playing a role he'd never asked for. But he was no longer alone. The Imperium watched with cautious respect. The Floor Guardians had evolved beyond simple loyalty into genuine partnership. And across the galaxy, beings whispered a new legend of an Overlord who had looked into the abyss of the 41st millennium and instead of despair, found defiance. The war was far from over. Chaos would return. The Necrons on the moon were stirring. The Tyranids would eventually reach this sector. And somewhere in the webway, the Eldar were making plans. But Nazarick had proven it could survive, could adapt, could matter. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, Ainz Ooal Gown had carved out something impossible: hope.